Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for having me. I'd like to start out by just acknowledging that we gather here today on the unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Just to start, you'll find out very quickly I'm not an academic, really, or an architect or an urban planner, so you may wonder why I'm here, but bear with me, and I think maybe we'll get there. In 1973, a group of 8 artists bought a building at the corner of Scotia and East 8th Avenue in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood of Vancouver. Built in 1922, it was formerly the Lodge Hall of the Knights of Pythias, but these artists renamed it the Western Front, an allusion not only to its Western-style architecture, but also their status as avant-garde artists on the western edge of the continent. These artists, musicians, dancers, and writers, or as this article suggests, freaks, envisioned their new home as a space that would allow them to explore a broader vision of what art could be, rejecting more established art world notions in favor of artist-run vision of culture, one that wasn't based in object production, but in collaboration, socialization, and community. Possibly one of the artists, or the city's first artist live-work scenarios, these artists felt, according to this article, that the society feels that too much energy has been expended in the past in finding suitable living, working, meeting space all over the city. And then asks, how would you like to be able to rent studio and perhaps living space at a reasonable rate? So that was 43 years ago. They were still talking about this now. We're still here in this building. We have a gallery, an artist in residence program, and a music program. It's a space for interdisciplinary collaboration and experimentation in which artists are always exploring and aesthetically and critically issues of our times. These issues increasingly include our built environment. This is a public artwork on our building by the Vancouver-based artist Rhys Terrace titled Another False Front from 2009. Rhys's work played with the Western Front's architectural form, and he sort of uses the extra false front as an effective metaphor for the gold rush of Vancouver's real estate market. 6 years later, Rhys's work, while no longer on the building, has a heightened resonance for us as our neighborhood is dramatically changing and increasingly defined by gentrification and property value, a dynamic we have found ourselves deeply involved in. We have found ourselves in close proximity, both geographically and economically, to a controversial new high-rise tower in the neighborhood on the corner of Kingsway and Broadway, for those of you that live in Vancouver. The tower is opposed by many in the community, and in 2014, the developers made a massive community amenity contribution to the city of Vancouver, a complicated and impervious process in which developers trade cash for height and density. 1.5 million of this has gone to the Western Front. Through these funds, we have been able to purchase our building, but our position is a tenuous one. The funding will provide significant security for the organization and allow us to compensate our exceptional artist landlords for their long-term investment in the arts, but forces us to address our own role and the role of art more broadly in issues of hyperdevelopment, real estate speculation, and the capital accumulation that are coming to define our city. So Urgent Imagination was a public art exhibition and 2-day conference that took place in October 2015. It was born out of a desire to more fully comprehend the machinations that we both use and are used by. As critical thinkers, as outsiders in the realm of urban studies and architecture, how could we, as an art institution, contribute to the conversation? The title for the project, Urgent Imagination, comes from an artist and architect, Teddy Cruz, a professor at UC San Diego who works primarily in the border region between Tijuana and San Diego. Cruz states, the best ideas in shaping the city in the future will not come from enclaves of economic power and abundance, but in fact from sectors of conflict and scarcity from which an urgent imagination can inspire us to rethink growth today. Art production in the city's current climate is most certainly a sector of conflict and scarcity from which this urgent imagination could rise and attempt to rethink the growth of our city. So art currently occupies a few different spaces in our urban planning imagination. There's the notion that art is the wedge of gentrification. First come the artists, then coffee shops and lively streets, and then condos. That public art is now often used as a marketing strategy or a means to add value to real estate is another well-worn view. We see a plethora of public art on private property. Similarly, the wide embrace by policymakers of Richard Florida's identification of the new creative class as an economic engine is justifiably critiqued as gentrification writ large, and my favorite is creative placemaking. In another interview, Cruz points out that as artists and architects, we can contribute to the rethinking of urbanism by designing and conceptualizing political and economic processes, but without an understanding of the conditions that produce this crisis, which can themselves be thought of as the architect's material, we will just be making public art or decorating the failings of misguided planning and selfish economics. He states, we, artists, architects, need to be the developers of our own housing. The new site of intervention is the developer's spreadsheet. So I'm gonna have to move through this really quickly. We invited a number of artists and architects to come and help us kind of unpack these issues. This is an artist, Nils Norman. It's called Vancouver Vernacular. Oh, sorry, I went too far. Go back. The piece that's been up here the whole time. Nils is an artist that's long been concerned with issues of cities, urban planning, and public art. For Vancouver Vernacular, he turned his eye to a new form that is increasingly decorating our city, the towering high-design condo billboard. The words Norman chose were taken directly from language around our neighborhood. Isolated and amplified on the side of our building, the work points to an urban planning process in which cities and the buildings within them are more marketed than designed. This next series of slides is from an artist collective, Urban Subjects, that are based in Vienna and Vancouver. The series Beyond Minimum is a poster project showing 3 historical examples of social housing using the European modernist idea of existence minimum or subsistence dwelling, the minimal acceptable space for living. They evoke this historical notion of a minimum, what's the minimum necessary for people to live in, and is puts forward at the same time while recognizing that the very idea of the minimum is the product of a restricted imagination, the austerity imagination. When developers propose microlofts as a solution for those who cannot afford to own a larger apartment, they inflict on us the logic of the market. It is better to have a starter apartment than to imagine a different mode of living. So many of you might know this. This is by the in Vienna by the Austrian architect Greta Schutt-Lehowski, through which she wanted to imagine a one-room apartment that was designed for the new woman, that would not simply meet a minimum, but help shape a different kind of life. This next one, we've talked a lot about the massive refugee crisis that is facing us. This is Jean Prouvé's Maison de Jour Meilleur, which was a house for better days, which was proposed for a housing crisis in Paris, a migration crisis in Paris in the 50s. This is far beyond anything that is being done at this point in time, yet maybe still shouldn't be seen as enough. The next one is a megastructure of social housing in Vienna, the Alt Erla Social Housing Estate, designed by Henry Gluck and Partners and built through 1973 to 85. It tries to overcome the division of social housing with what Henri Lefebvre called an architecture of enjoyment. Imagine social housing in which we aren't paternalistically excluded enjoyment, but which this is built right into what the program is. I'm gonna blow past this one. Well, I won't, I'll be very quick. This is Assemble. They're a 16-person architecture collective out of London, England. They've just won the Turner Prize for Art, which is the first architects to ever have won that. As outsiders, they came to Vancouver and interviewed a ton of people, and this is their allegory, The Good, the Bad, and the Allegory, which is based on a series of frescoes in Siena called The Allegory of Good and Bad Governance, in which the walls of the conference or the chambers were decorated with what a good urban reminders for policymakers what their responsibilities to their students, to their citizens were. And then this is a kind of a Vancouver specific thing. This is a building that's being built on the corner or at the bottom of the Granville Street Bridge. It's Vancouver House. I know sorry, I'm just got flustered trying to finish up so quickly. I put this slide up not as an indictment of Bjarke Ingels or Westbank, who's the developer, or even Rodney Graham, who has proposed what I actually think is a really great work of public art that will go along with this massive building, which is down here on the bottom. But this Gesamtkunstwerk, which is how this building was marketed to us, a total work of art is what they called it. If this is what we think of as the way that art can function in our city, a mega architect designed luxury tower with a blue chip piece of artwork, we have become so inured by the market imagination that we urgently need to intervene. That's it. Thank you so much.